Welcome to Notable Approvals. I am attorney Amanda Shaffer. I'm very excited to talk about our case today. Before I get to it, quick reminder, don't forget to like us and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, wherever you are watching. If you find this video to be helpful or know someone who may, please go ahead and hit that share button or save, comment, whatever you got to do so you don't miss any of our lives. All right, let's get to the case. So, today's case, I actually found out about Friday. Friday was a fun day in the Shapiro law firm immigration world. We had actually 2 asylum approvals after court. The other one I will talk about hopefully tomorrow, if not later in this week. So, today's case is about a client who is a native and citizen of Nigeria. He is a resident of Manhattan and a lawyer licensed to practice in New York and in his home country of Nigeria. We've represented lawyers in all different sorts of cases. I think this is the first, at least, licensed U.S. lawyer that we've won asylum for. So that's why I think the case is particularly interesting, but also what happened in the case was interesting. So as I said, he's a lawyer. He first came to the U.S. in 2014 as a student. He got his LLM at Columbia, took the New York bar, passed, and then his OPT, his optical practical training, was coming to an end, so he had to return home. And he actually had a job offer in the U.S. under the J-1 exchange program, and he had a job offer back home in Nigeria with the Nigerian, I think it was the Nigerian government, with one of his old bosses. So he wasn't sure if he was going to stay in Nigeria or come back to the U.S. at that point. He was probably leaning more towards the Nigerian job, but he still had to go home, see his family. He needed to go to the U.S. Embassy in Abuja to get his J-1 visa to re-enter the U.S. at a J-1. So he had to go home no matter what. So in 2017, he went back home. He saw his family and friends like he planned, had his visa interview, and then he went back to his village where he was born. Oh, I didn't put my phone on silent one. That's, as they say, what happens when you go live. All right, we're on Do Not Disturb now. Okay, so when he got back to the village, he hadn't been there in a long, long time. It wasn't near Lagos or the city. It was rural. I think he said it was like a 20-hour drive or something from Lagos. And things were a lot different. There are all these blockades up. Checkpoints. It was really militarized with the Nigerian security forces, the police forces, the army, whoever was there. And he also learned that there was some mass protests earlier in the day, as well as a lot of unlawful and arbitrary arrests taking place in the area. And the reason was that this was happening, and this was something that's been happening a long time in that area. My client is not a member of this ethnic group. It's called Biafra, but this is an indigenous group in that area, and they've been trying to secede from Nigeria for a very long time because they have been treated very poorly by the Nigerian government for a very long time. However, the Nigerian government views them as a terrorist organization. The U.S. government and the international community does not, which is very, very important for later on. But my client's not a member of that group. He's not a member of the ethnic group. He's not a member of the political group. He just came home, told, the Nigerian police force are really stirring up trouble with people. They were arbitrarily arresting people that they just assumed were involved in the movement, even if they weren't. So he gets there that day, and his cousin says, "Look, our cousin, 2 of our childhood friends, they disappeared." And when that happens in that area, it usually means somebody was unlawfully arrested. So my client being that he's a lawyer, and in Nigeria, it's very common. I mean, I guess in a similar way to the US, they have a bail system. Difference being bail in the US is not a bribe. In Nigeria, it's pretty much just a bribe. But it's common that a lawyer goes to the detention center wherever a person's being held. They say, I'm a lawyer. I'm here to, to uh, pay the bail or to really get this person out of detention. And then they're told to pay a certain amount. They get the money. The person gets bailed out. It's generally it's easier when a lawyer comes. A lot of times they can get someone out without even having to pay a bribe, or it's at least cheaper. So he says, all right, I'll go tomorrow and get them out. So the next day he goes to the police station. He shows his identification. He says that he's a lawyer. He's here to, bail them out. And then the police start asking him questions. They're accusing him of being affiliated with this IPOB group. They're like, well, he's like, no, I'm not. I'm just a lawyer. And they're like, well, why would you come here and bail them out if you're not part of the group? And he's like, well, just like in the US, Nigerian lawyers are trained as well that you are not required to be politically aligned with your clients. I have a lot of clients that I might not agree with their beliefs, but I'm still going to represent them. And that's what he was saying. He's like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm just a lawyer here to bail them out. That is it. So they make him wait. They say, all right, we want your wallet and cell phone. And he was like, that was a weird request. Then they started accusing him of having another cell phone, a burner phone. They were saying, it's interesting you come back now because that's when trouble was happening for like this leader of this group. Then they started assaulting him. Like, he wouldn't ask questions. They slapped him. They took him to another room. Then they stripped him and handcuffed him to a chair and interrogated him, threatened to mutilate him. And he did have some connections in the Nigerian government, but nobody that really, unfortunately, could help him. But he kept saying to the people detaining him, look in my phone, you'll see these emails with these people high up in the government. Like, I know people. And he wasn't saying it because he thought he was going to be saved, but then they knew it's more like, I have access to money. Let me call people so I can get money so I can get the hell out of here type of thing. So at first they didn't even care. They wouldn't look. And also he wanted them to know that people will look for me. That's the other thing, because some people just disappear there. Nobody's looking. Nobody asks questions. He's like, no, people are going to look for me. But he was left in a crowded cell that night, no place to shower, go to the bathroom. When he asked them for water, they made him drink his own urine, like just deplorable, horrible things. The next day, he had to do some horrible things for them. Basically, these guys go around and there's extrajudicial killings all the time, so they need help getting rid of the evidence. So they're trying to get him to do that. But finally, the police looked through his phone, and I guess they saw something like, oh, we can get some money. So they told him, okay, call your family and friends, tell them to bring money. So he does. And he has to even bring a surety because he didn't live in that village, and his friend who was bringing the money didn't. So they had to bring someone to vouch for him, actually. But they come, get him out of there. As soon as he leaves, he first goes back to the embassy in Abuja and picks up his passport. Oh, I forgot to mention one thing. Part of his condition of release, they said, give us your passport. And he's like, I don't have my passport. It's at the U.S. Embassy. I was there for a visa interview. I won't have it for a week. So they said, okay, in 1 week, come back. You give us your passport, and then you're going to have regular check-ins. So he knew he couldn't wait that week. And if he did that, who knows what would happen. So luckily his visa was ready. He gets his passport, goes back home, packs his suitcase. And then his friends were like, you need to go to the hospital. We're worried about like internal bleeding because he was beaten pretty badly and, went through some really horrible conditions in the 2 nights, 3 days he was in custody. So he goes to the hospital and he goes to the hospital And then, oh, why did he didn't report it to anybody, to the police, because the police were the ones who were persecuting him. There was no faction in the government that could have helped. And the people he knew in the government, although as much as he wanted to reach out to them and say, hey, I'm not part of this group, can you help me? The accusations that they made of his affiliation with this alleged affiliation with this group was so serious and severe. It's like, to me, it sounded akin to treason. Like, you're trying to succeed from your nation. That's treason. So even though he had those connections, they weren't going to be able to help him. So he's like, I'm not playing around. Basically, kind of made it at this point. His family really wanted him to take the job in the U.S., and he was like, and thankfully he had the job in the U.S., which he was positioned to be starting like within the few weeks. So he's like, all right, I got to get out of here. So goes back to Lagos for the weekend, gets his stuff and flies back to the U.S. with his J-1 visa. His cousin that he went initially to release from detention, he was never found. They believe that he was extrajudicially killed. The other two people were eventually released. They were unlawfully detained. So when you're talking about Asylum, that was his story coming up to the U.S. We talk about a couple of things. Number one, you have had to suffer past persecution. Clearly, he suffered past persecution. He was unlawfully detained, beaten, subjected to deplorable conditions, threatened, all of that. Past persecution done. Now, you don't have to have past persecution. You can just have a reasonable fear of future persecution. But with asylum, when you prove past persecution, then there's a rebuttable presumption that you will suffer. It's more likely than not you will suffer future persecution if you are returned to your country. And it's up to the government to rebut it by either showing that there's a change in country conditions, so you'll no longer be harmed, like a different government in power, or there is a place to internally relocate. And we'll get to that in one sec, because the other part of asylum is that the reason for your persecution, it has to be on account of one of 5 protected grounds that the law says, which is political opinion, religion, ethnicity, nationality, particular social group. So this is not a particular social group claim. I will not get into that. Now, political opinion. Political opinion is what this case was based on. It was actually imputed political opinion, because this wasn't even his political opinion. It didn't matter if he agreed with what this group stood for or not. All that mattered is that he was, it was assumed he supported them just because he went to bail them out. And then the last part is that, so that your persecution is happening on account of one of those protected grounds, and that your persecutor or persecutors has to be the government or someone the government is unable or unwilling to control. In this case, persecutors were the government, so that was pretty easy. So let's get back to future persecution. After he left Nigeria, he found out from his cousin that there were some strange men coming around and asking questions about him and his family after he didn't show up to the check-in and give them the passport. And then it turns out, since he left, things have gotten drastically worse for the Biafra people. In 2019, Buhari was reelected president, and it was his government that's really doing the crackdown. I believe, if my memory serves me correct, there's a new president now, but it's not Buhari. It's someone who was in the same party as him. Could be misremembering that, but pretty sure that's what the situation. Either way, same government, same people in power type of thing. And I'll tell you how bad things have gotten. I forgot this piece. Things have gotten so bad over there that in that area, people actually are forced to stay home on Mondays. They have, what is it called? my mind's blanking. Curfews. Curfews, and they have those, like, if they don't want people gathering. It's to prevent associating and the protests and stuff. Like I said, it's all militarized with the checkpoints, so people are very scared over there. And this is really, and part of future persecution is continued harm. So sometimes you have both. So sometimes you show both types of future harm. You show my past harm is so severe that it's continuing to affect me. So I have future harm, and sometimes it's like I'm gonna experience future harm because the conditions are still the same back in the country. His case, we had both to show. He had severe PTSD and trauma, anxiety, depression, flashbacks, trouble sleeping, pretty much all of the above. Now, another interesting thing about this case was there a 1-year issue or not? And when you apply for asylum, you have to apply within a year of entering the country, unless you meet one of the very, very narrow exceptions. And I talk about these a lot. I find the exception cases very interesting because they're rare. And it's really hard to prove. In his case, he entered the US in 2017 on the J1. He applied for asylum in 2019. That was more than a year later. So we weren't positive if the government was going to have a problem with that. Well, turns out it didn't even come up in the hearing, but we were prepared because he was actually in status when he applied for asylum. So he was in status 2017 to 2019 on the J1. When his J1 was about to end, which meant he had to go back to Nigeria, that was like a month or two after Buhari was reelected. And that was when he realized, like, I can't go back. He figured I'll come to the US for a couple of years, maybe it'll die down and things will change. Didn't happen. So that's when he applied by himself for asylum. Now, one of my favorite quotes that I like to say is that, and not just my favorite quote from law school. It's like something they teach us in like the first week, that a lawyer who represents himself represents a fool, or herself represents a fool. And it's a really great saying, because it's very hard to represent yourself, especially if you've gone through a lot of trauma and everything. But in this case, he was representing himself up until less than 2 weeks before his individual hearing, which is the trial. And that's when we get the call. And he says, I have a trial. It was like maybe 10, 12 days. And we were like, okay, well, you better get in here because everything's already late. And we're going to have to do an entire asylum case, which these are not a small things to do in less than 2 weeks, which is a lot. So we were like, why didn't you come before that? Why didn't you find a lawyer earlier? Because he doesn't practice immigration law. Even though he was practicing law in New York, he is doing some corporate stuff. He knew nothing about immigration law, just like I know nothing about that corporate stuff. And he said to us very honestly, like, look, I've been really struggling with this. Like, I couldn't face it. And, we were really worried about this because we're like, listen, you're a lawyer. You're going to be held to higher standard. The judge is going to expect you to have listened at your master hearing when you were given deadlines, and we've already passed the deadlines. I was like, look, all I can do is try. I can file a motion to accept it on timely filing. I don't even know if the judge will get it before then. I was like, we're going to need to send you to get a psychiatric exam because I was like, you should probably go see someone anyway, but you're having some, obviously something was going on if you waited this long. I mean, this is, again, an educated person, a professional. And they do look at those cases differently. So I filed the motion to accept it on timely filing. It was thankfully granted before the hearing, so we knew, and we did explain it. We didn't even have the psych eval in time for that, but I did have it in time for the hearing, which it actually also helped to corroborate his story, because he was suffering these symptoms because of what happened to him back there. But a psych exam alone, while I do recommend it a lot of times in asylum cases, isn't going to be enough, of course. So he, I gotta say, was very lucky to have found us because we know what we're doing. Most, when I just started off practicing law, I couldn't have done an asylum case in less than 2 weeks, and then be so confident and win the case that easily. Uh, so I I felt for him a lot, and I really wanted to help him. And so I was like, "This is what we need to do. I need you to help yourself now." And he did what we needed to do. We practiced. I was like, "You're going to be fine." So, what kind of evidence did we submit? Of course, identity documents, birth certificate, passport, proof of entry is J1 documents. And so we can prove, in case the 1 year issue came up, that there was an exception to the 1 year issue. His education documents, showing he was barred here, that he was barred in Nigeria, the job offers. Um, that was more to corroborate his story and also to show like he had a reason to stay in Nigeria. It wasn't like that decision had been made that he was desperately coming back to New York. He didn't lie about his intent when he came on the J visa. He did have a life back there that he wanted to go back to. And then we submitted evidence of persecution. We had a very detailed statement that he wrote explaining everything. He actually, when he went to his asylum interview at the asylum office, they gave him a request for evidence and he submitted additional documents. So we submitted those again. He had a friend who was there who wrote an affidavit to back up what happened that day. The medical report from the hospital he went to after he was released from detention, the email exchange between him and another government official in Nigeria, the one who offered him the job, that he said when he was being held that to his captors, like, look who this person is, look who my emails are with, look who I'm supposed to be starting a job with. So we were able to show the dates and everything corresponded to what he said had happened. So that was all great. And of course, country condition reports. He submitted a bunch of articles in 2019 on his asylum interview, resubmitted those, and then we updated it and showed that things were actually getting worse in that area. And then finally, as I said, the psych exam. I wasn't even sure if it would be admitted because I was like, I'm not going to file a second motion for untimely filing. But at that point, it was like, we need to get all this filed. And there are, some exceptions when you have someone that's going through trauma, depending on the judge, depending on how you approach it. It's never a guarantee that that argument works, even though it's legitimate. But you got to try everything at a certain point. So then we get to the individual hearing. Now, normally, I'll talk about the individual hearing a little bit, but not that much. And this one was a battle royale. That's how I felt. I thought it was going to be pretty straightforward, this hearing. Again, right or wrong, there are certain assumptions or beliefs that people have about others. And when you go to an asylum hearing with a lawyer who had a life back home and, would have had I'm sure had a great job lined up and everything, he automatically is given some credibility that way. But what you have to always be ready for in litigation in general, but especially when it comes to these removal or deportation proceedings, you never know what's going to happen. You got to be ready for all of it. So the government attorney for DHS, they kept going over these gruesome details about when he was in detention, and like to the point where I had to step in a bunch of times and stop it because my client was getting visibly upset. And I always say this, and I'll say it again. It is perfectly okay to show your emotion during your trial, as long as it's natural. My client, he seems so no, it's not straight edge. What's the word? Stoic. He seems so stoic. I wasn't expecting the tears during the trial, but it made sense when they came because he was asking to recount what happened in detention over and over again. And these details were so minor that he was being asked to corroborate that. And I honestly, for the sake of the viewers and my client, I don't want him to relive that horror, because I know he's going to tune in. But also, it's not necessary. All I'm saying, it wasn't necessary what the government attorney did. It went on for like 4 hours, this hearing. And I was getting very upset too, because I was like, stop asking him about, these morbid things. He's already answered. He's answered it truthfully. He's answered it in corroboration with his detailed statement. But at the end of the hearing, the DHS decided. Now, at the beginning of the hearing, let me say this first. The judge asked every single time, every single hearing, every single client, to the government attorney, are background checks clear and complete? And if they're not, you don't go forward with the hearing. You have to go back. Or if you go forward with the hearing, which is about the case, actually, my other case on Friday that I won, if you have to go forward and checks aren't clear and complete, you can't get a decision until they are. I'll talk about that, like I said, another day. So his checks are all clear and complete. We get to the end of the hearing, and the DHS attorney says, I need to run additional background checks. And we're like, what? And a lot of his questions were kind of focused on terrorism, because, as I mentioned earlier on, the Nigerian government considers this group IPOB, IPOB. Sorry, I'm not gonna. That's a hard one for me to pronounce. They consider them a terrorist group, the Nigerian government, but no one else does. The U.S. doesn't. The UN doesn't. International bodies don't, etc. Or Human Rights Committee, all of that. And why is that significant? Because there's a terrorism bar in the U.S. to get asylum. And it's a very, very strict bar, which I've talked about in other cases, where if you have assisted a terrorism group basically in any way, and you should have known that they were a terrorist group, even if you were forced to do it, even if all you did was cook and clean for them, and you would have been killed if you didn't, you could be barred from getting asylum. So because his questions kind of were terrorist in nature, because he was asking things like, because this group, I think, there was reports that they may have attacked something or someone somewhere. I don't remember the details. I just remember it didn't matter for the case. And I'm like, what does this guy, this attorney, keep doing to my poor client? And I objected to the additional background checks. I said to the judge, I go, Your Honor, everything, this whole case was submitted on paper in advance. The government knew exactly what the issues were. They could have ran any background check they wanted. Why should he have to now be tortured further and have to wait for an unknown period of time? Because let me tell you something, when the government has to run background checks, and especially when they don't go through for some reason, we are helpless, because we have no idea what's holding them up. It could be the person's country that they're from. It could be something internal. It could be your name is similar to someone else's name. I mean, there's a whole host of reasons that we never, ever get to know. Why don't we get to know? Because it can endanger national security. So I object. And I said to the judge, this is just not fair, because I had to file a motion to submit an untimely evidence, to submit late evidence before the hearing. Yet if DHS were to run those checks after the hearing, find something, the hearing would remain open and we would have to deal with it. And that doesn't seem fair, does it? Them's the rules, right? So I objected, but I think the judge did the right thing, and she adjourned the case to allow DHS to complete the additional checks. In my opinion, if she would have agreed, although it did seem like she agreed with me, that it was kind of BS that DHS was doing this, they would have appealed the decision, and they probably would have won, because they have almost unlimited power when it comes to making those decisions. Their discretion. They would need to run background checks, and they are given the authority to do everything in their power to make sure people granted immigration benefits, especially asylum, when you have these tough issues, that they're not going to be a danger to this country. Now, it was crazy also because remember, my client had to pass the character and fitness portion of the New York bar. And any attorney, if you're watching out there, including myself, who's gone through that process with the New York bar, it's actually an in-person interview where they go through your entire everything. They ask about every little thing. In fact, I remember the government attorney trying to insinuate that my client lied on his bar application if he didn't tell them he was arrested. And I was like ready to go sparring with this guy. I was getting so mad. He didn't lie on his bar application. But again, that meant that we had to wait. So we were given a date this March 2024. And this was right at the end of last year, the hearing. And I was told that I can reach out to the government attorney a couple of weeks into January, ask him if the background check's cleared, and then if they did, to let the judge know. And we might get lucky and not have to wait till March to get a decision. Well, thankfully, that is what happened. I had a note in my calendar. I reached out to the government attorney. I said, hey, I have a note in my calendar that says to follow up about the background checks. Were you able to complete them now? And he wrote back, yes, they are clear and complete. I will let the judge know. So then he emails the judge with me and says the same thing. Judge says, okay, because the DHS wouldn't pick their position on the case until the background checks were clear and complete. Meaning they wouldn't say if they were going to consent to asylum, object to asylum, or defer to the court. Usually when they usually don't consent, they just defer to the court. So defer to the court or object. So the judge wrote back in the email to the government attorney, what is your position? He wrote back, we are sad, and do you want more testimony? Because that was left open too. And he wrote back, we are satisfied with the testimony. We defer to the court, which means, like I said, a grant, but still now it's in the judge's hand. And I felt the judge was going to grant it, but until you get the grant, you don't know. The judge said, okay, by end of the week, I should have a decision. And then I think it was Friday morning or Thursday night, either way, I get the decision, and I knew it was going to get granted. But of course, when you finally get it, it feels much, much better. My client can finally relax and know that he never has to go back there. So it was, like I said, a really, really interesting case. I'm really happy for him. In 1 year from last week, he'll be able to apply for his green card. In the meantime, I know he wants to visit some family and friends in Africa. He's not going to go back to Nigeria. He's going to be able to get a refugee travel document to see his parents in another country. Probably Ghana is usually where people go. So there's a couple of lessons from this case I want to point out before we go. Number one, do not wait. Do not wait until the last minute to hire an attorney. This is a case where you see that happen and the client get very lucky. Finding, yes, I'm saying he was lucky finding us, and I get to pat myself on the back once in a while, but in all seriousness, there's a lot of attorneys, you have to be lucky with their calendar. You have to be lucky they know what they're doing. So I know it's hard because when you've gone through what a lot of our clients who have applying for asylum have been through, it's hard to face it. It's hard to deal with it. But the longer you wait, you're making it just harder for yourself. And it also costs money. You don't get free lawyers in immigration. So he was lucky he was able to afford it too, because I wish and one day I hope we have a nonprofit branch of our law firm. But until that time, we can't afford to do cases without getting paid. So he was very lucky. It was just in the nick of time. And, another lesson I always like to point out is that you got to be prepared for anything. How many times I've gone in thinking DHS, and sometimes it's not based on just my guessing. It's based on what happened at a prior hearing, that they had an issue with one issue at the prior hearing. So I focus on that, go to the hearing, and now it's something else. So you have to be ready for everything whenever you go. You want to prep for everything and just be prepared. I win cases because I'm prepared. And keep your faith. That's the other thing. I mean, this client, he was feeling good after the hearing, but it was a blow, to be told now you have to wait 4 months to get your answer. And not even knowing exactly why they wouldn't give a decision that day, why they needed to run these background checks. I sat with him after for a while. And this was a Friday, I remember. And I was like, listen, I don't know. I don't know what I was like, these are all the things I think it could be. I think it's the terrorism thing. I was like, I don't think they have any possible, like, anything to hang their hat on to be able to claim this as terrorism. I explained to him the terrorism bar. I was like, but just, I know it's hard. Just, you got to stay positive, try to sleep. He's like, I hadn't slept for weeks. I'm like, just, it's going to be okay. And, it finally was. I mean, like, I'm thrilled that instead of him having to wait 4 months, it was only a few weeks. That wasn't a guarantee. But now he doesn't have to worry, and we're very happy for him, and we're very excited for him to get his green card soon. So, put up my little background now. That was, I said, it was a very succinct explanation, or maybe not so succinct. I spoke for a pretty long time, but I wanted to really cover everything. I really found this case to be interesting. I really felt, this is why we have asylum in this country. There's a lot of lessons to be learned. Watch this video again. If you or anyone have any immigration problems, looking to apply for asylum, Instagram, go to our bio page. You can find our contact info there. Facebook, YouTube, our contact information scrolling across the bottom of your screen. If you found this video to be helpful or know someone who may, go ahead and click that share button, save button, comment. Don't make sure to like us and follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, wherever you are watching, so you don't miss any more of our lives. And I will be back either tomorrow or later in the week. I'm going to try tomorrow because I have a very, very interesting asylum case again after court, another background check issue to talk about, where a client who is a native citizen of Moldova and Russia. So we're going to get two countries there, 2 in 1. We're going to get to that. Like I said, that decision actually came in on Friday as well. And after a 2-year, I think it was a 2-year delay. I'm going to check out the dates on that. That is all for today. Thank you all for watching, and have a good day.